Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I am John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. We've got a good topic for you today. I think all of you have an answer besides your mom or your ex, but let's do it. Who is the most evil woman in human history? Please remember to like, share, behave, and subscribe. Gertrude Vanisweski, also known as the torturer and murderer of Sylvia Likens. She was supposed to take care of Sylvia Likens and her sister while being paid by their parents. She would regularly beat Sylvia, once forced her to eat a hot dog completely overloaded with condiments and spices, then eat the vomit when she threw up. One of Gertrude's kids beat Sylvia so badly that she broke her own wrist on Sylvia's face. She got a cast, then proceeded to use the cast to beat her more. Gertrude allowed and encouraged it. A whole bunch of neighborhood boys or boys from school would come over and also torment Sylvia. They would use her as a training dummy for judo, throwing her around and punching and kicking her. They would cut her with knives and put cigarettes out on her skin. They also generally beat and burned her genitals as well. Sylvia eventually became incontinent and was denied use of the bathroom, forced to wet herself. After that, she was then kept in the basement full-time, tied up, sometimes tied to the railing of the stairs with her feet barely touching the ground. She was denied a bathroom, food, or water for most of the time. Gertrude would charge kids a nickel to see Sylvia tied up but naked and her tortured and injured body. She would also allow them to beat, scald, burn, or mutilate her. Gertrude frequently would restrain and gag Sylvia before putting her in a bathtub with scalding hot water and rubbing salt in her wounds. Gertrude at one point forced Sylvia to shove a Coca-Cola bottle up inside her as a punishment for Sylvia urinating on herself. Mind you, she was incontinent from the abuse. Gertrude branded the words, "I am a prostitute and proud of it," into Sylvia's stomach with a heated needle. They also forced her to consume the contents of a used baby diaper, and her own feces, as well. Sylvia eventually died from all of this, and honestly, this is just the highlights. Sylvia was tortured for 3 months. She was 16 years old when she died. It's one of the most horrific crimes in Indiana history, and one of the worst cases of abuse, torture, and murder in American history. Amelia Dyer, a Victorian serial killer who adopted illegitimate children for profit and chucked the bodies in the Thames. Ingrid Olderock, a torturer during Augusto Pinochet's reign in Chile. She trained a dog to RAPE prisoners. Michelle Martin. She was the wife of Belgian serial killer Marc Dutroux. The monster helped him kidnap children, kept them hidden in the basement to be raped by him. Because he didn't give her enough attention, she let 4 little girls die of hunger. That bitch has been released from prison and now lives free in Belgium. How she hasn't been shot in the head is a wonder. Mayuki Ishikawa. Mayuki Ishikawa was a Japanese midwife and probably the most prolific serial killer in Japanese history. With the aid of several accomplices, including her husband, Ishikawa killed between 85 and 169 babies, mostly through neglect in the 1940s. During the trial, Ishikawa argued that it was the parents who were responsible for their deaths, as they had deserted the children. Surprisingly, her defense was partly successful, and she was only sentenced to 8 years of prison for her crimes. She even managed to halve the sentence through an appeal. Definitely Queen Ranavalona I from Madagascar, also known as the Mad Monarch. She was Queen of Madagascar during 33 years, and specifically between 1833 and 1839, the population of the country went from 5 million to 2.5 million. She used a form of forced labor called phanomapona to achieve her infrastructure goals, and had her army expand her kingdom to the whole island of Madagascar, while killing hundreds of thousands of civilians in the process. She was very fond of killing Christians, since Christianity usually means repudiating the ancestral customs and cultures of other civilizations. Hence, she hated Christians and did all she could to hunt them down. One of her favorite punishments was the Tangena ordeal, in which the accused would ingest the poison of the tangena nut along with 3 pieces of chicken skin. If the accused managed to vomit the 3 skin pieces enough poison and survive, they would be declared innocent. Otherwise, they would be declared guilty and killed in case they survived the poison. So, due to the amount of deaths under her orders, 3 million more or less, and her passion for torture, I rank her as number 1. I honestly never heard of this woman, but I will look this up, and it does sound like another case of absolute power corrupting absolutely, and terrible. Las Pocahinchas, 4 sisters from Mexico in the 50s and 60s. They ran a prostitution ring. They kidnapped and lured young women from poor cities, telling them they were going to be maids, religious freaks that regularly beat and force-fed them drugs. They killed the women when they got pregnant, too old, had suffered damage from the rapes of the clients who liked them anymore. When they got captured, they found over 80 women's bodies, fetuses, and some males, allegedly men that had too much money and got killed for it. Ilse Koch, the bitch of Buchenwald. Her husband was the camp commandant at Buchenwald during the Holocaust and World War II, and she herself was an overseer there. She and the other officer wives would order male prisoners to strip naked and then would order them to line up in front of them. The ladies would laugh and lewdly judge the prisoners by their genitals. She was known to ride by the prisoners' pens in her car and flash her bare breasts at the prisoners. Any prisoner she claimed looked at her would be executed. She and her husband would order certain prisoners to join them in bed, where they would essentially sexually assault those prisoners. Afterward, she would have those prisoners executed. After the war, Koch gained prominence as one of the first Nazis tried for war crimes by the U.S. military. She hanged herself in prison in 1967. Good riddance to an evil, evil woman. Rose West. Her husband was already murdered several women before he even met her. He went to prison, and she had to look after their children together, plus a child of his from his first marriage. The child's name was Charmaine. Rose West was very abusive. Charmaine always stood up for herself and was stubborn. She ended up killing Charmaine. Her husband, Fred, comes out of prison, and she tells him what she did. He gets rid of the body, and they go on to kill for decades more. The world just got so unlucky that 2 people capable of such immense cruelty managed to meet and marry. And it's so crazy that without his influence on her own, she murdered her child. Empress Lu. Concubine Qi was a consort of Emperor Gaozu, founder of the Han Dynasty. After Gaozu dead, Empress Lu then had concubine Qi killed in an inhumane manner. She had Qi's limbs chopped off, eyes gouged out, ears sliced off, nose sliced off, tongue cut out, forced her to drink a potion that made her mute, and thrown into a latrine. She called Qi a human swine. Several days later, Emperor Huai, son of Gaozu and Lu, was taken to view the human swine and was shocked to learn that it was concubine Qi. He cried loudly and became ill for a long time. He requested to see his mother and said, "This is something done not by a human. As the Empress's dowager son, I'll never be able to rule the empire." From then onward, Emperor Huai indulged himself in carnal pleasures and ignored state affairs, leaving all of them to his mother, and this caused the power to fall completely into her hands. Georgia Tan for sure. The case still bothers me. She was an American child trafficker. She had an adoption agency in Tennessee but had no license and used it as a front for her black market baby adoption schemes from the 1920s. Young children were kidnapped and then sold to wealthy families, abused, or, in some instances, murdered. A state investigation into numerous instances of adoption fraud led to the closure of the institution in 1950. Tan died of cancer before the investigation made its findings public. Tan's custom of placing children with influential members of society normalized adoption in America. So many children murdered. Enriqueta Martí, the vampire of Barcelona, comes to mind. She catered to high-class pedophiles in early 20th century Barcelona. but then started kidnapping destitute kids and probably stole infants to make quack medicine out of their body parts. She was caught because a neighbor identified a girl she'd kidnapped living with her, although some of the darkest details were never proven, if truly are horrifying. Mary Beth Tinning. She killed her 8 children, 7 biological and 1 adopted, due to having Munchausen by proxy. The cause of death for Tinning's first 8 children was initially thought to be genetic. Even when their 6th child, Michael, who was adopted and not of blood relation, died in 1981, authorities failed to open an investigation. Eventually, Schenectady County prosecutors had enough evidence. A laboratory test indicated death from asphyxia by suffocation to charge Tinning and Tammy Lynn's death. In July 1987, she was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 20 years to life in prison. An appeal to the New York State Supreme Court argued that her confession was coerced and there was insufficient evidence to convict her, was denied. Karla Homolka. Her and her boyfriend, Paul Bernardo, kidnapped, raped, tortured, and killed 3 women in my hometown, then dumped their bodies in ditches and a river. One of them was her sister. It's sick shit. It terrified our community. I still see one of the girl's fathers around town sometimes. He's a very sweet man, despite all he's been through. They let her out of prison years ago, and she's living a totally normal life. Yay, Canadian justice system. Luckily, Bernardo is still in prison, and likely always will be. She even has children now, which is super effed up. I watched them tear down their house in Port Dalhousie. It was cathartic. There were 2 Byzantine emperors whose mothers had control of the empire while they were children. When they became old enough to take control of the empire, one cut her son's nose off. Disfigured like that meant the end of any political power and respect, but he still managed to lead an army and regain control. Another blinded her son for the same reasons, but he died from the blinding. Ilse Koch and Irma Gries, some of the worst Nazis. Koch would often take this pastime outside the arena and into the camp itself, where she would taunt prisoners until they looked at her, at which point she would whip them. Survivors of the camp recalled later during her trial for war crimes that she always seemed particularly excited about sending children to the gas chamber. Her other hobby, which would later become a major point of contention during the Nuremberg trials, was her collection of lampshades, book covers, and gloves, said to have been made from human skin. Gries had placed braided wire at the end of her whip, and many of the women developed infections from their wounds. Gries also had dogs that she would order to attack an inmate who could not keep up in line. Gries was a sexual deviant, as she became aroused at the sight of bloodshed and pain of others. She enjoyed torturing people, as that gave her pleasure. She even tied the legs together of a woman giving birth and watched the woman scream with pain. Well, these Nazi women, this is the second time we've heard at least one of them mentioned today, and it deserves to be reminded to everyone constantly that evil like this existed, and they both ended up dying by hanging, one by themselves and one by a tribunal. Catherine de' Medici. Over her son's shoulder, a Catholic Italian woman was governing France while having an affair with her other son, demands the execution of every Huguenot who stays in town for the wedding, and marries her daughter off to a Huguenot whom she hates. Massacre of St. Bartholomew's Day. Anyone else she doesn't get along with is poisoned. Not a very good lady. Irma Gries. She was an SS guard in World War II and one of the most infamous and brutal. She had control over 30,000 female prisoners, killing them in cold blood with a whip and gun. Not to mention that she's reported to have had sexual pleasure while doing this. She was later hung by the Allies in 1943. Carolyn Bryant. In 1955, she falsely accused a 14-year-old black American named Emmett Till of catcalling her. She got away with that huge lie, and that resulted in the boy getting abducted and murdered by white supremacist men. She's still alive today, I believe. Karla Homolka, Canadian serial killer who acted as an accomplice to her husband, Paul Bernardo, taking active part in actual rapes and murders of at least 3 minors in Ontario, including her own sister, Tammy Homolka, between 1990 and 1992. Mao Zedong's wife. She was responsible for the Cultural Revolution and was a member of the Gang of Four. The Cultural Revolution was the most effed up mass purging campaign in human history. Millions have died during that time. From Chinese history, there are many evil women. Others are Empress Cixi and Wu Zetian, which both did many effed up stuff to ascend and safeguard the throne. There was one recent rank bitch who kidnapped, raped, tortured, and murdered either 4 or 5 women or girls. The last one survived because she squeezed out of a bathroom window naked and ran, but hid evidence in the ceiling tiles before she did so. I cannot for the life of me remember the killer's name. Can someone help me out? Mary, better known as Bloody Mary. Mary I was the daughter of Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon and became Queen of England in 1553. She was a granddaughter of Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile, royal religious fanatics who established the Spanish Inquisition. Bloody Mary was a fanatical Catholic who despised her father's break from Rome and sought to reverse his and her brother's reform. Her 5-year reign is most famous for her brutal religious persecution and laws condemning hundreds of religious nonconformists to death via burning at the stake, even when the Vatican itself recommended a full pardon be issued to all accused upon recanting and promising future obedience to the Catholic faith. Bloody Mary had more than 280 people burned at the stake for heresy, apostasy, or blasphemy, mostly Church of England priests, laymen, and some of the women who had supported the moves away from papal supremacy and ancient Catholic theology undertaking during the reigns of her father and brother Edward VI. Mary I married a younger cousin, the widowed Philip II of Spain. He was a fellow brutal religious fanatic who once said, "I do not wish, nor do I desire to be the ruler of heretics." After her death, Philip II would intensify the enforcement of medieval Catholicism within Spanish territories, allocating vast resources to the persecution of nonconformists via the Spanish Inquisition, established by his and Mary's ancestors, Ferdinand and Isabella. Empress Cixi of China, having her own family members and attendants killed to keep an iron grip on power and driving the country into bankruptcy and rebellion to acquire vast sums of wealth. Also, the Purple Witch of East Berlin, Margot Honecker. She was the chief architect of keeping despotism codenamed National Socialism going on the east side of the Berlin Wall, training young kids to be assassins, sending people to labor camps, wanting to continue trends of concentration camps held up by the Nazis and devout Stalinists. Horrible woman. She managed to escape to Chile, I think, after the fall of the Berlin Wall and avoided being tried for war crimes. My vote goes to Elizabeth Bathory. She is listed in the Guinness World Record as the most prolific female murderer. She was accused of torturing, mutilating, and killing around 650 virgins between 1585 and 1610. Legend has it that Bathory had vampire-like tendencies. She reportedly drank and bathed in the blood of victims in an effort to retain her youth. 650 virgins? Jesus, that is a lot. Whoa. Pearl Fernandez, Gabrielle's mother. Pearl abused and tortured Gabrielle, her son, over a period of months and years, including locking him in a cupboard and feeding him dirty cat litter, shot him with a BB gun, and would stab cigarettes out on him. He would go to school with broken bones and bruises, yet still made a Mother's Day card for her. Watched the documentary and couldn't stop crying. Really affected me. It's really horrible. On Netflix. Watch with caution. Alyssa Baker. She was the abusive stepmother to and eventual murderer of 10-year-old Zara Baker, a cancer survivor and amputee. She spent her time abusing and teasing a child and then savagely murdered her and committed various other crimes. She's a person I'd happily pull the trigger on.